Well, hello Dragons, and welcome to this instructional video for Lesson 6, Part 3, Economic Goals. The main idea behind this economics lesson is government in the United States has four main economic goals. With that in mind, by the end of watching this video, you'll be able to explain why the government regulates business, describe how the government works to provide public goods, explain how the government promotes individuals' well-being, and describe how the government works to stabilize the economy. Now that the outcomes for this lesson have been shared with you, let's get started. Think about what government does for you. Does your community have garbage collection? Do you use a public library? What kind of financial aid is available to students who plan to attend college? Currently, the federal, state, and local governments provide these services, and many others, to you and other citizens. This has not always been the case, however. Throughout much of U.S. history, popular acceptance of laissez-faire economic practices limited the government's economic role. As government grew, however, it took on an increasing number of functions that affected the economy. Specifically, federal, state, and local governments began to regulate businesses, provide public goods, promote citizens' economic well-being, and stabilize the economy. Today, the government share the first three of these goals, while economic stabilization is practiced primarily by the federal government. In the United States, all governments, federal, state, or local, regulate business through rules and procedures that guide economic activity. Some of these rules and procedures affect the ways that companies interact with individuals, while others address the impact of company policies on the environment and the market. Government regulation has four main purposes: preventing abuses, protecting consumers, limiting negative externalities, and promoting competition. As noted in an earlier video, one key purpose of government regulation is to prevent businesses from taking unfair advantage of workers. For example, you may have noticed the initials EEOC in job advertisements in newspapers. The government, through the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or EEOC, makes and enforces regulations that protect workers from discrimination in hiring or promotions based on age, sex, race, religion, or national origin. The government also sets standards for working conditions. Federal agencies such as the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, monitor businesses and punish violators. According to government statistics, enforcement of OSHA regulations contributed to a decrease in workplace fatalities from 18 per 100,000 workers in 1970 to less than 4 per 100,000 workers in 2019. In addition to regulations that protect workers, the government also passes laws that protect consumers, savers, borrowers, and investors. For example, the Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, and Consumer Product Safety Commission, or CPSC, protect people from products such as unsafe foods, medicines, and toys. The Federal Trade Commission, FTC, and the Federal Communications Commission, FCC, ensure that advertising and sales practices are ethical, truthful, and fair. The federal government also ensures citizens' checking and savings deposits and oversees insured banks to make sure that they follow banking laws. Federal credit laws also protect borrowers. The Securities and Exchange Commission, or SEC, meanwhile, protects investors against fraud in the securities trade. It sets procedures for the registration and sale of stocks and licensing of securities dealers. The SEC has the power to punish any violators. Many state and local governments have created agencies and developed regulations that further protect consumers and borrowers. These regulations apply to all businesses that operate within the state or local boundaries. Another way in which governments protect workers, consumers, and society is through regulations that minimize the negative side effects of some economic activities. As noted earlier, these side effects are called externalities. Examples of negative externalities include pollution, traffic congestion, and soil erosion. The Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, NRC, and other government agencies establish and enforce regulations intended to limit these negative externalities. For example, in 1991, the EPA awarded a $350,000 grant to Robert Smee, director of the Pacific Materials Exchange in Spokane, Washington. Smee's company allowed companies and cities to sell their waste products, such as scrap steel and used Freon, a coolant used in refrigerators and air conditioners, to organizations using these products as raw materials. The EPA grant enabled SME to develop a computerized network linking waste exchanges across the United States. Another purpose of government regulation is to promote competition. As noted in Lesson 2, government accomplishes this goal through the creation and enforcing of antitrust legislation. This type of regulation prevents the formation of monopolies and breaks up existing ones. The Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890 was the first major antitrust legislation in the United States. Later, legislation clarified and strengthened this act. In addition to regulating businesses and the products they make, governments themselves provide goods and services. These public goods are goods and services made and available to and consumed by all citizens. Why does the government provide public goods? As noted in Lesson 5, the price system fails to assign the cost of public goods among all consumers. The government, however, can accomplish this goal. It can charge, or tax, all citizens for the cost of public goods, even if some people do not use the goods directly. For example, the government charges Mary Ann for the public school attended by Jamie, even though Mary Ann does not have children enrolled in the school. Additionally, the government can ensure that public goods are available to all citizens who need them. For example, an education is available for Jamie, whether he decides to attend a public school or a private one. Furthermore, government must make public goods available to all citizens, though citizens can decide for themselves whether to use those goods. Jamie's parents may indeed choose to enroll him in a private school, but the government cannot prohibit him from gaining an education at a public school if he so chooses. How are public goods provided to citizens? Federal, state, and local governments frequently share the responsibility of funding and distributing public goods. Governments have sometimes decided, however, that private industry is capable of providing certain public goods. How do governments share the responsibility of providing public goods? Some goods, such as courts, corrections departments, and law enforcement agencies, are found at each level of government. Other goods are the primary responsibility of one level of government with funding from and the cooperation of the other levels. Local government, for example, manages public education but receives state and federal funding to help pay the costs. An exception to this system of shared responsibility is national defense, which is provided solely by the federal government. In recent years, some governments have turned to the privatization of public goods. Privatization refers either to the sale of government property or to the handling of government services by private businesses. Garbage collection, for example, has been privatized in many cities. Even some hospitals formerly run by the government are now operated by private hospital chains. Why would a government decide to privatize some of its services? Supporters of privatization justify it in three ways. First, they argue that private firms can operate certain industries more efficiently than the government can. A case in point is mail delivery. The U.S. Postal Service faces considerable competition from private carriers. Many businesses opt to use Federal Express or UPS, for example, for mail or packages that must be delivered quickly. Second, supporters of privatization argue that the government should not compete with private businesses. The Federal Housing Administration, or FHA, for example, provides housing loans in direct competition with private lenders, or banks. Third, supporters point out that government could reduce its costs and pay off some of its debt through the sale of public properties and services. Great Britain, for instance, has raised more than $20 billion since 1979 through the sale of certain government-run businesses. Opponents of privatization argue that public goods are provided by the federal government because private industry was unable or unwilling to provide these goods to all consumers in the first place. Opponents also point to the tremendous resources that government has available to meet the special requirements and circumstances of providing public goods. The third major economic role of government is promoting economic well-being. To fulfill this function, the government works to improve people's standard of living and to redistribute income among citizens. The standard of living for a nation, state, or region reflects how people live and how many goods and services they consume. Consider your community. Where do you and your neighbors buy food? How many people are likely to own consumer goods such as television sets, computers, and stereo systems? What educational opportunities are available, and how many people take advantage of them? Diet, production consumption, medical care, and education are four areas that affect people's standard of living and for which the government has shown a high degree of concern. Another is medical care. Programs like Medicare and Medicaid provide health insurance to older Americans and to people with low incomes. The government also helps hospitals cover the cost of treating people who do not have insurance. How do these programs raise people's standard of living? Obviously, people receiving medical care are helped by this policy as their health improves. At the same time, the general public is helped as regular and preventative health care reduces both the need for expensive long-term care and the likelihood of epidemics, diseases that spread quickly throughout a population. To promote economic well-being, some government programs are also designed to reduce the gap between rich and poor. The government tries to accomplish this through a system of transfer payments. In a transfer payment, the government takes money collected from one group of citizens and distributes or transfers it to another group of citizens. Transfer payments work by the government establishing specific aid programs that distribute income to anyone who meets certain qualifications. Some of these programs provide incomes for households, while others help pay for medical care, higher education, housing, and job training or retraining. Some programs are wholly financed and administered by the federal government. The federal government, for example, provides monthly Social Security payments to older people and to people with disabilities. In 1994, the federal government also distributed more than $27 billion worth of food stamps to 28.9 million low-income Americans. Other programs are sponsored by state and local governments. These programs include aid to people who are sick, elderly, and poor. For example, food deliveries and reduced prices for transportation. Some private businesses and public agencies also receive transfer payments, usually in the form of grants and aid, to ensure that continued services or production of certain goods. The government, for example, assumes some of the costs of subways, bus lines, commuter trains, and other systems of mass transportation. In this way, the government ensures that such services are available and affordable for many people. Although federal, state, and local governments all regulate business, provide public goods, and promote economic well-being, the federal government generally works alone to stabilize the economy. The justification for the government's role in stabilizing the economy comes from the Constitution's mandate to promote the general welfare of the people. The government stabilizes the economy primarily by moderating the business cycle and by responding to market failures. The U.S. economy generally follows a pattern, with periods of prosperity followed by periods of economic slowdown or recession. This pattern of rising and falling of the economy is called the business cycle. Prior to the Great Depression, the government did not attempt to stabilize the business cycle. However, during the 1930s, and increasingly after World War II, the federal government greatly expanded its role in managing the economy. Today, the government tries to steer the economy on a middle course that avoids recession and inflation. To achieve this goal, the government today varies its taxing and spending policies and controls the nation's money supply. These government actions will be explained more fully in Lessons 8 and 9. In addition to moderating the business cycle, the government tries to ensure economic stability by limiting the effects of market failures. Market failures include externalities, the inability or unwillingness of private enterprises to produce some public goods, inadequate business competition, and consumers' inadequate knowledge of market conditions. You learned earlier in this video how government limits externalities and provides public goods. How does government address the other two types of market failures? As noted in Lesson 2, inadequate business competition occurs when one or a few businesses dominate a field and control the price and supply of a good, as in the case of a monopoly. The government responds to inadequate competition with regulations that prohibit and dissolve monopolies and that open industries to new competitors. As for the fourth type of market failure, the government responds to consumers' inadequate knowledge of market conditions by ensuring that information is available to the public. You are already familiar with two agencies that act as friends of consumers, the CPSC and the SEC. So that's the way it is with Lesson 6, Part 3, Economic Goals. At this point, you should know that government involvement in the economy has increased since the abandonment of laissez-faire economic policies in the 1930s. Governments often share responsibility for providing public goods to their citizens. The government promotes economic well-being, and the federal government acts to stabilize the economy. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel to have the entire catalog of economics videos available at your fingertips. Click the subscribe button and then click the follow bell to receive notifications as to when the channel is updated. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in class, Dragons!